This is not just a story about cheating. This is a story about value and how some people only recognize it once it's gone forever. Daniel Cross had been married for 23 years. On paper, his life looked successful and complete. He was a well-known real estate executive, lived in a large gated house, drove expensive cars, and attended elite social events. People admired his discipline, his confidence, and his authority. That behind closed doors his marriage had grown silent. His wife, Eleanor, moved through the house quietly, as if she were a guest instead of a partner. She spoke softly, avoided arguments, and never demanded attention. She cooked meals, handled responsibilities, remembered everything Daniel forgot, and asked for nothing in return. At first, Daniel found her calm comforting. Over time, he began to see it as weakness. To him, Eleanor slowly faded into the background of his life, unnoticed and unappreciated. Then Vanessa entered his world. She was younger, louder, and endlessly expressive. She worked at a luxury car showroom where Daniel had gone to reward himself with a new purchase. Vanessa laughed at his jokes, complimented his success, and made him feel important in ways Eleanor hadn't in years. She admired his status, his lifestyle, and his power. Secret lunches turned into late-night calls, and soon hotel meetings replaced business dinners. Vanessa loved expensive things: designer bags, diamond jewelry, five-star restaurants, and social media moments that screamed luxury. Daniel wanted to keep her impressed. Being desired again made him feel alive. But impressing Vanessa came with a cost, and Daniel hated spending his own money on anything that didn't directly benefit him. One afternoon, while Eleanor was visiting her sister, Daniel noticed a small wooden jewelry box tucked deep inside their bedroom closet. It was old, slightly scratched, and clearly not something anyone would proudly display. He opened it out of curiosity. Inside were gold bangles with delicate engravings, antique rings with unusual settings, and a necklace unlike anything sold in modern stores. Daniel frowned. To him, the pieces looked ancient and unfashionable. He shook his head and scoffed. Eleanor never wore them. They just sat there, forgotten. He never stopped to wonder why. When Eleanor returned home that evening, Daniel casually asked about the jewelry as if it meant nothing. "Why do you even keep those old things?" he said. Eleanor froze for a moment. Her hands tightened around her teacup, and her eyes lowered slightly. "They belong to my mother," she said quietly, "and her mother before her." Daniel dismissed her words with a wave of his hand, calling them useless and outdated. Eleanor looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something deeper. "Please don't touch them," she said softly. Daniel nodded as if agreeing, but inside he had already made his decision. Vanessa wanted something special, something expensive, something that proved she mattered. One night, while scrolling through luxury jewelry websites, she told Daniel she didn't wear basic gifts. Daniel smiled, pretending confidence, while calculating silently. Then he remembered the jewelry box. The next day, without hesitation, he took it to a private antique dealer downtown. The dealer opened the box and his expression changed instantly. He became cautious, curious, almost respectful. "This is interesting," the man said slowly. Daniel felt excitement rise in his chest. He asked how much it was worth. When the dealer named a number, Daniel accepted immediately. He never asked why the man looked so surprised. He never asked what made those pieces special. Vanessa was thrilled when she received her gift. She posted pictures online with vague captions about gratitude and blessings, making sure no faces were tagged. Daniel felt powerful again, desired again. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood in their bedroom that night, staring at the empty space in the closet where the jewelry box had been. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "So, you chose." From that moment on, something inside her changed. Days passed and Eleanor grew quieter than ever. She stopped cooking elaborate meals, stopped reminding Daniel about meetings, stopped asking questions. Daniel enjoyed the silence, believing he finally had peace. Until one afternoon, his phone rang. The caller spoke formally, mentioning a transaction involving antique assets registered under the Whitmore estate. Daniel laughed nervously and said there must be a mistake. The voice on the other end calmly replied that the jewelry he sold was under historical and legal review. Daniel's confidence cracked for the first time. That evening, Eleanor finally confronted him. "Did you sell it?" she asked. Daniel didn't deny it. He said it was partly his anyway. Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "No," she said softly. "It never was." She placed a folder on the table, documents Daniel had never seen before. Old records, legal stamps, official seals. As Daniel flipped through the pages, his hands began to shake. Eleanor spoke calmly, explaining that her family didn't simply own the jewelry. They were entrusted with it. It was protected, passed down, and preserved for reasons Daniel never cared to ask about. When Daniel asked what she meant, Eleanor looked at him directly. "From people who don't understand value," she said. The jewelry no longer looked old to him. It looked priceless, dangerous even. Then his phone rang again. This time, the caller identified themselves as the Heritage Valuation Board and asked Daniel to come in immediately. Eleanor picked up her coat. "I'll be leaving tonight," she said. Daniel asked her what he should prepare for. She paused at the door and answered quietly, "For the moment you realize that the most valuable thing you ever had wasn't the jewelry." And then she walked out. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The house felt different without Eleanor's quiet presence, as if the walls themselves were watching him. Every sound echoed louder than usual. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the vibration of his phone resting face down on the table. He kept replaying her words in his head. "It never was yours." For the first time in decades, Daniel felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Not guilt, not regret. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the Heritage Valuation Board building, still convinced this was some sort of misunderstanding. He wore his best suit, the one that usually commanded respect. Confidence had always been his armor. But the moment he stepped inside, that confidence began to crack. The building wasn't flashy or modern. It was quiet, formal, and intimidating in a way money couldn't soften. The people inside didn't look impressed by titles or success. They looked precise, careful, like people who dealt with things far bigger than ego. He was led into a private room where 3 individuals waited: an appraiser, a legal representative, and a historian. They laid the jewelry pieces on the table, now carefully preserved in protective cases. The same jewelry Daniel had called old and useless. The appraiser spoke first, explaining the craftsmanship, the era, and the rarity. The historian followed, describing the lineage attached to each piece, generation after generation, protected, catalogued, and quietly monitored. The legal representative finished with words that made Daniel's blood run cold. The jewelry wasn't just valuable. It was registered under an estate trust with historical significance. Selling it without authorization had triggered an automatic review. Daniel tried to laugh it off. He said he didn't know. He said it was a mistake. But ignorance didn't erase responsibility. The legal representative calmly explained that the sale had already attracted attention from collectors, institutions, and private bidders. The value Daniel had accepted was only a fraction of its true worth. Not thousands, not hundreds of thousands. Much more. Daniel's mouth went dry. Suddenly, the number he'd been paid felt insulting, embarrassing, dangerous. Meanwhile, Vanessa was enjoying the attention. Compliments flooded her social media. Friends asked about the bracelet. She loved the feeling of being admired. But admiration turned into confusion when the jeweler who had resized her bracelet called unexpectedly. He asked strange questions about documentation and ownership. Then came another call. And another. By evening, the bracelet no longer felt like a gift. It felt like a problem. Back at home, Daniel received a message he never expected from Eleanor's lawyer. The message was polite but firm, requesting a meeting regarding estate assets, marital boundaries, and legal separation. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. Eleanor had never threatened him, never raised her voice, never involved lawyers. That silence he once found comforting now felt like a warning he ignored for too long. When Daniel finally confronted Eleanor, it wasn't with anger. It was desperation. He went to the small apartment she had quietly prepared long before leaving. That realization alone unsettled him. Eleanor had planned her exit. Calmly. Carefully. She listened as Daniel spoke. Excuses, justifications, explanations. But none of them reached her. When he finished, Eleanor told him the truth he was never ready to hear. The jewelry wasn't just valuable because of money. It represented trust, heritage, responsibility. Things Daniel never respected because he only understood worth in numbers. She explained that her family had protected those pieces through wars, losses, and sacrifices. They were never meant to be sold for attention or status. They were safeguarded for future generations or entrusted to institutions when the time was right. Daniel had broken that trust without asking a single question. Eleanor wasn't angry. She was disappointed. And disappointment, she told him, lasts longer than anger ever could. As news quietly spread through certain circles, Daniel's reputation began to shift. Business partners became distant. Invitations slowed. Conversations ended quickly. No one accused him publicly. But silence followed him everywhere. People who once praised his judgment now questioned it. He had always believed power protected him. Now he realized power only lasts as long as people believe you deserve it. Vanessa, on the other hand, panicked. The bracelet was taken for verification. Her name appeared in documents she didn't understand. The luxury lifestyle she loved suddenly came with scrutiny. She demanded answers from Daniel, but Daniel had none left to give. For the first time, she saw him not as a powerful man, but as someone losing control. And Vanessa had never stayed where control was slipping. When Daniel returned to the Heritage Board for the final review, the verdict was clear. Legal consequences would be avoided due to Eleanor's cooperation, and the recovery of the assets, but only barely. The jewelry would be transferred back under estate protection. Daniel would walk away legally free, but not untouched. The value assessment was finalized, and the number placed in front of him made his hands tremble. He finally understood what he had thrown away, not just money, but legacy. The most painful part came later, alone in the empty house, when Daniel realized something irreversible. Eleanor hadn't taken revenge. She hadn't tried to ruin him. She had simply removed herself. And in doing so, she exposed the truth without raising her voice. The jewelry had value because it was protected by someone who understood it. Eleanor had value for the same reason. And Daniel had lost both the moment he decided they were replaceable.